Netflix bad. Devil May Cry, a video game series that's either extremely loved or hated for some of the goofiest reasons I have ever seen, like not understanding the story after willingly choosing to play the 5th installment first.
I don't understand a thing in this game, bro. This game has done nothing but just confuse me, bro. You know what I'm saying? I just don't understand what's going on.
Personally speaking though, I wouldn't exactly call myself a fan. Now that's not to say I hate the series, quite the contrary, I've enjoyed every single one of the games I've played so far. It's just that I don't think I qualify as a fan because 1, I haven't played all of them, and 2, I'm not nearly as enthusiastic about the franchise when compared to the majority of the community. To put it into perspective, I played the 3rd game first, the first one after that, and then watched the 4th and 5th game via YouTube playthroughs. We don't talk about the 2nd game. I also was not nearly as outraged as most people were when that remake by Ninja Theory came out. And that should pretty much tell you how impersonal this topic is to me. It seems like people are starting to ease up on that catastrophe though, now that Netflix has managed to get their grubby little hands on the series. Yep, after 5 whole years since the last time any content about this franchise was released, the first thing the fans were fed after the drought was an 8-episode anime created by the guy who did this to Castlevania.
I was going to say something witty and cutting and brutal before I finished you off. But f*** it.
Now to be fair, I haven't played a single Castlevania game, so maybe I'm just uncultured. Maybe this was a completely faithful and accurate representation of the franchise, and I'm just the one who's incapable of comprehending. Oh. Well, that's not good.
No disrespect to anyone that has made a video game adaptation before, but they've been cash grabs by posers.
And thank God we have you here to save us, Addy boy. Look, if you haven't already figured it out from the copious amounts of bitching everyone's done, people didn't exactly vibe with the new DMC anime. There's a bunch of reasons why, but the biggest is the fact that apparently it didn't do a very good job of accurately adapting the source material. But then I also heard that allegedly that was the point, as in they deliberately took the characters, world, lore, and then deliberately chose to not follow the plot from the games because they didn't see the point in telling the same story. I'm not sure if this was actual facts or extremely pathetic cope from people trying to defend it. The closest I could find was an article claiming that Eddie said this was originally supposed to be part of his bootleg universe. Either way, this is sounding painfully familiar. But like I said earlier though, I'm not exactly a super fan. I can understand why they'd be upset of course, but I personally don't give too much of a shit if they choose to revamp the story. In fact, I'll even admit that when I first saw the teasers leading up to the release, I was actually somewhat enthusiastic about the project. Sure, the dialogue seemed to be abysmally cringe, but the animation for the fight scenes actually looked pretty cool, so I was forcing myself to believe that maybe it could still be an enjoyable overall watch. I am, after all, a shonen-brained Rick who claps at jingling keys. I'm sure if I sit back and not think about it too much, I'll still have a nice viewing experience. No chance it could possibly be that bad, right? The show opens up in Europe, where we see a bunch of faceless criminals sneaking into a museum in Vatican City. And from the looks of it, they came severely over-prepared, since the guards seem pretty underarmed, all things considered. I'm just gonna assume that's a very strong gun instead of your armor being made of paper mache. The Solid Snake crew make their way to the weapons exhibit where they start looting the place, but are quickly interrupted by a bunny man in a suit.
Hey, what's up, dog?
As it turns out, it was Roger Rabbit over here who hired them to steal from the museum in the first place so that he could get his hands on a sword called the Force Edge, the weapon used by Sparta, the Demon Knight. He makes short work of the robbers before proceeding to blow up the entire building in a blaze of glory. So, let me get this straight. He was able to sneak in, set up several explosives all around the building without anybody catching so much as a whiff of him, and then still make it to the room with the sword before the mercenaries did to put on this whole show for them. Yeah, right. What was the point of hiring these guys again? I mean, I know why. I'm just asking because it's really contrived. While all this was going on, we're introduced to a demon hunter named Dante, who's currently in the middle of a job. He hunts down and takes out a few hellspawns in a dark alleyway, saving a woman in the process, and for the most part, the action scenes are actually pretty good. It's fast, energetic, and overall decent eye candy as far as visuals go. My enjoyment really only plummeted the moment he opened his mouth.
The way this usually goes is I do that, then drop a killer one-liner. But I'm drawing a complete blank right now. This never happens to me, I swear. Okay, wait, I got one. Pretend I just shot that guy. Bang! Man, Skeletor did not hold up since the 80s.
That right there. I hate it. Call me an old man, call me uptight, call me whatever the hell you want. But just know that this disingenuous, self-aware meta-irony dialogue crap that's literally plaguing everything these days is something that genuinely grinds my unwashed asshole. We'll get back to this in a little bit, but for now, all I'm going to say is that this first scene is actually one of the less painful instances of this shit. So as it turns out, much like the bombing of the Vatican, the job given to Dante was all set up by the Rabbit Man so that one of his minions can try to steal his necklace while simultaneously attracting attention from the government. Here's where the lore comes in. Thousands of years ago, a war was waged between the human and demon world, but one demon named Sparta fought against his instincts and instead sided with the humans to protect mankind. With the power of his sword and magic amulet, he created a wall to separate the two worlds, sealing away the hellspawns to their homeland. Unfortunately, the wall itself isn't 100% stable as it still allowed weak, low-level demons to slip through the cracks. Now the White Rabbit is planning to tear down the wall and connect the two worlds once again, which would in turn destroy humanity. To do this, he needs to acquire both Sparta's sword and the amulet that was used in the sealing process. Unfortunately, while he does have the sword, the amulet's been split into two pieces, and one of them just so happens to be sitting comfortably around Ace Ventura's neck over there, which now brings us to Dark Realm Command.
Darkcom, as our PR department insists we call it.
Because I guess Evil Incorporated was already taken. Darkcom is an independent organization created by the Vice President of the USA, consisting of an elite team of soldiers dedicated to killing any demons that manage to sneak into the human world. And as humanity's main defense against the creatures of damnation, their task is now simple: retrieve the necklace from Dante and stop the White Rabbit from initiating the apocalypse. Let the race begin.
Hope to see you all there.
First things first, let's just get this out of the way immediately. For those who know nothing about the franchise, this adaptation is very clearly heavily based on Devil May Cry 3. The younger version of Dante, the plot of the amulet and undoing Sparta's spell, the inclusion of Lady despite her being introduced much later into the series, and even the main villain was plucked out straight from an official manga that told a story taking place exactly a year before the events of DMC3. Speaking from a production standpoint, I can understand this decision since DMC3 is technically the kickoff point to the overarching story timeline-wise. Plus, this works out perfectly for me because, as mentioned earlier, I've played the third game, and it's actually the one I'm most familiar with out of all the other installments. Underneath all the wacky humor and over-the-top spectacle, Devil May Cry 3 is an admittedly simplistic story, but with surprisingly layered and complex characters that do a lot of the heavy lifting in driving the narrative forward. It stresses heavily on the concept of shouldering responsibility, the everlasting scars of abandonment, and most importantly, the exploration of bonds between family. While I wouldn't exactly call it a masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination, and I assume the main appeal of the franchise to most people isn't exactly the story, it doesn't change the fact that the developers did a pretty good job of making this cheesy, sometimes downright stupid game an emotional roller coaster, which sadly just didn't translate all too well into the show. I'm not against adaptations making small changes to the story or cutting out fluff in order to make things more coherent, because let's face it, as cool as it is to see Dante stop time, it's not exactly a vital point to the story. That being said, the changes Adi Shankar has chosen to make are neither small nor insignificant. Virgil, gone. Jester, gone. The Temenigru, gone. Instead, the story now takes place in a much larger setting via the United States of Burgerland, and instead of keeping the plot condensed to a small number of characters and themes, they choose to add in a bunch of new elements like government oppression, interspecies politics, religious extremism, and very lame attempts at setting up a Capcom cinematic universe.
This has got to be the second worst job you ever gave me.
Oh, you mean after the Raccoon City job?
To be clear, I'm not saying that including these elements immediately destroy the story you're trying to tell, but these are subjects that you need to handle with a certain level of class, or else you run the risk of coming off pompously preachy and cringe. Something that Adi clearly missed the memo for, because none of these things were handled particularly well.
The radical left is already using this to push their agenda.
Gee, I wonder what they're trying to say. The most egregious aspect is definitely the whole anti-government crap and the interspecies mumbo-jumbo. Literally one of the biggest things about the DMC franchise is that demons are inherently evil. You can literally count the number of exceptions on one hand, and even they will vouch that their kind should be eradicated. So when they try to portray the Hellspawns as just a bunch of oppressed, misunderstood refugees, I just... no. But that being said, while the story definitely left a lot to be desired, I was still willing to look past it if the show was able to give me a good time. I mean, the animation, as I said, was still very good, and I know a lot of people may have hated the overabundance of copyrighted rock music, but I honestly thought they worked pretty well with the fight scenes and such. I mean, come on, if you're trying to tell me the visual of Devil May Cry characters aura farming over Limp Bizkit is not cool, then you're just lying. Unfortunately, any enjoyment or appreciation I had for these moments are immediately tossed out the window whenever I think about how much they have bastardized these characters that I love. It's impressive, honestly, how they got pretty much none of these characters right. Each and every one of them feel like they were written by a person who just briefly skimmed the personality section of their wiki page and then called it a day. Let's start with Dante, who, despite what the advertising might have you believe, is not actually the main character of this anime. More on that very shortly, trust me. I already mentioned it earlier, but I absolutely hate what they have done to this man's personality in this adaptation. A lot of people only know Dante from the games as just the wisecracking, cocky, carefree, demon-killing badass who's way too powerful to give a shit about anything. And granted, I'm not going to deny that that is a huge part of his charm, but if you're going to try to lean even further into that aspect of his personality, then presentation becomes literally everything, and that's where Netflix ultimately failed. This version of Dante is definitely carefree, but his level of strength definitely does not warrant his level of cockiness. The amount of times this dude is getting his ass handed to him by opponents that he really should not be having any trouble against is absolutely baffling. For example, in the game, Dante was able to beat both Agni and Rudra without breaking a sweat while still having his power seal away. On the other hand, in the Netflix show, they were straight up toying with him on the plane, and he only managed to eke out a victory by trauma unlocking his devil trigger. Not even of his own volition, Agni was deliberately taunting him about his mother's death so that he'd get angry and draw out his powers. You're not cool if you're arrogant but can't back it up, you're just stupid. Aside from that though, most of the smart-ass quips that he's throwing around during battle aren't even all that good. I'm not gonna pretend like the game version of Dante was spitting out super hot fire all the time, but he always delivered every single line with so much confidence that it usually cancelled out how cringy or corny his dialogue is. Plus, at least there was some level of creativity put into the one-liners besides just quoting le popular piece of fiction.
Which of you is the Human Torch knockoff? So how come none of you guys get cool Alice in Wonderland themed identities? You were never a demon at all. Just a man wearing a screwed up bunny mask to hide an even more screwed up human face that has a bunch of weird tubes sticking out of it.
He's literally just describing the situation in a confused voice. It's not clever or funny, it's just lame. There is literally zero confidence behind this man's words. They've sucked out all the charisma from him. Netflix Dante is deliberately trying to act cool. DMC3 Dante is just being himself, which just so happens to be awesome. But Pseudo, this is a younger version of Dante. You can't expect him to immediately be the person from the games. He's going to change into that person as the story goes on. Even if it's a prequel, a character shouldn't be so different to the point where they're pretty much unrecognizable from how they usually are. You do realize it's entirely possible to keep their core character traits while still showing that they're still in the process of learning and growing as a person, right? Devil May Cry 3 is a prequel. That game featured a younger version of Dante too, and yet they were still able to make him an incomplete version of himself without completely destroying who he is as a character. They didn't have to turn him into a bumbling, idiotic to show he hasn't fully grown yet. Majority of the game was about him learning to stop rejecting his demon side, the side of himself that he initially despises because he believes it's the main reason that caused his mother's death. He was still the confident, cold badass that we all know and love, but he was also clearly immature, hot-tempered, even straight up callous at times. His main reason for even fighting Virgil wasn't to prevent the end of the world, he was just doing it because of petty sibling hatred. But as the game progresses, he eventually learns through his interactions with various different characters, primarily Lady, to accept the fact that as the son of Sparta, he was granted with the gift of immense power, and with that power comes the responsibility of living up to his father's legacy of protecting the human world, even if it means killing his own brother, who, despite their differences, is the only living family member he has left. And this, in my opinion, is 1,000 times more interesting than goofy dumbass finding out he's a half-demon. I can absolutely see this guy growing into this guy. Can't say the same for this loser. These two may have similar backstories, but as far as I'm concerned, they're completely different characters, and not in a good way. Aside from him, there's the villain, who is referred to throughout most of the show as the White Rabbit. I hate him. I can respect the attempt at trying to give a one-note side character a bigger role, but the person our little bunny boy is competing with at this point in the story is Virgil, who is by far the best antagonist in the franchise. Fellow son of Sparta, wielder of the Yamato, the storm that is constantly approaching. While Dante is brash, carefree, and easygoing, Virgil is calm, calculating, and driven by an unwavering sense of purpose. purpose. His endless pursuit for strength stems from the guilt of not being able to save his mother, blaming his own weakness and incapability to protect her for her death. Because of this, he's chosen to reject the human side of himself, becoming obsessed with fully embracing his demonic heritage in order to obtain true power. He's not only the perfect foil to Dante thematically, but also personality-wise, because despite coming off as a stoic party pooper, he's actually one of the only few antagonists who can bounce off of Dante's smug attitude throughout every one of their encounters. By comparison, the White Rabbit over here just didn't stand a chance. There's no personal connection between them, they have essentially little to no chemistry whatsoever as enemies, and his motivations as a villain is just really boring. I already mentioned it earlier, but the whole humans are the real monster narrative has always been something that I hate, and this scenario is no exception, especially since it's not done in any new or creative way. It's just the same routine of portraying human soldiers as genocidal maniacs and the literal creatures of hell who are just innocent, oppressed victims of circumstance. Also, the twist of him being a human too just made it worse. I was practically screaming for this loser to die. And then finally there's Lady, the actual main protagonist of this show. Lady is a girl who was introduced in the third game as one of the major characters, and she continued to make appearances in later installments, and in all honesty, I didn't mind her. She was a fun and interesting character with a really tragic backstory involving her insane father killing her mother because he was dead set on trying to become a demon. Her entire journey as an aggressive, angry demon hunter seeking revenge to a playful, cheeky mercenary who's a good friend to Dante was a genuinely cool thing to see, so I'm not inherently against her getting a bigger part to play in the overall story. What I am against is turning her into an astronomical for literally no reason. Instead of a hired gun on a path of vengeance, the lady in the show is a trained soldier working under Darkcom as one of its top operatives. Her father, Arkham, is pretty different from his game counterpart, as instead of a psychotic scholar obsessed with the dark arts, he was instead an actual loving dad who was driven to madness in pursuit of power to protect his family. The killing of Lady's mother was accidental after losing himself to an unstable serum, and his last moments alive was him giving Lady an apologetic look as he burned to death in their home. Tragic, but significantly less brutal than the game version of Lady, who had to come to terms with the fact that her father was a complete monster who killed his wife in cold blood and would gladly do the same to her if it meant he could live out his dreams of becoming a god. That said, you would think it was the other way around, because Lady is 10 times more of a bitch in the Netflix show than she ever was in the game, constantly berating people, resorting to violence at the slightest inconvenience, and just generally acting like an unpleasant douche whenever she's on screen. And this is not to say that game Lady was a saint either. She definitely had some questionable moments too, the most egregious one being when she shot Dante in the head without fully knowing if he was a demon or not. But despite her rough edges, the game always made sure to drive home the fact that she's not just an angry, vengeful brooder. Even at her most edgy, she could still smile, banter, and be empathetic. That last one is especially important to emphasize because the fact that she's able to still shed a tear after killing her father despite all the horrible things he's done is unbelievably vital to her character, because it drives home the fact that her rough exterior up to this point really was just her way of dealing with trauma, and proves to us, the player, that at her core, she is a good person. It also probably helped that she was always kept in check by the fact that a good number of the people around her are significantly stronger. Yes, she's undoubtedly a badass, but there was never at any point where Dante couldn't put her down if he really wanted to, and that's the way it should be. He's the half-spawn of the strongest demon to ever live. He should not be getting outdone by a human. At least not 3 whole times. Lastly, there's her dialogue. Do I even really need to say anything?
Fucking shit, motherfucker. They're shithole. This shithole. Shit. M-I-fucking-A, whatever. What the fuck? Now, motherfucker. This shit be fucking comfortable. Fucking hell. What was that? Dumb fucking motherfucker.
I have no idea what the thought process was when writing her script. I'm not saying characters aren't allowed to swear, but excessiveness is definitely a factor you need to account for. It's kind of hard to take her seriously when she has the same vocabulary of a toddler that just learned what the F word is. To say they fumbled her character is the understatement of the century. Overall, Netflix May Cry is mind-numbingly mediocre at best and painfully infuriating at its absolute worst. I can definitely see some semblances of a good show buried deep beneath this fester of shit, but it's being held down by a variety of small issues that just keep piling over each other, the most prominent one being the cringy humor and dialogue. If the characters can't even bring themselves to be serious long enough to not crack a painful attempt at a joke every couple of minutes, then why in the hell should I give a shit about anything that's going on? almost every word on the script is practically oozing with insecurity. It feels like it was written by someone who genuinely didn't want to tell a story, but they're so afraid of possibly getting called corny or overly serious that they instead choose to play everything off as a joke. That way, if anything comes off as cringe, they can just go, haha, it's ironic guys, we're not being serious. Lame. Completely and utterly, unequivocally lame. But then again, season 2 has already been greenlit, so what the hell do I know? Maybe I'm just a wet blanket who can't comprehend the genius that is Adi Shankar's work.
Like, I'm a fan. I'm genuinely a fan. Like, I grew up playing games. I'm a gamer.
Great f***ing job, bro.